Thanks for clicking on this video. I really appreciate you being here. If you enjoy the story, consider subscribing and feel free to like the video or drop a comment below. It really helps the algorithm recommend these videos to you and to others who might enjoy them too. Either way, thanks for giving it a chance, and I hope it pulls you in. I do not have much time, and I need you to understand something before you stop reading. This is not fiction. This is not some story I made up for entertainment. 3 days ago, I watched my town die, and I am one of maybe 4 people who made it out alive. If you are reading this and you live somewhere rural, somewhere small and quiet, I need you to pay attention. If the silence comes to your town, if you see something standing in the darkness that should not be there, do not make a sound. Do not speak. Do not whisper. Do not even breathe loudly. They can hear you. They are always listening. My name is Ben Keller. I am 32 years old, and until 3 days ago, I was an electrician in a small town called Cedar Falls, population 2,000 give or take. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where you wave at your neighbors and eat breakfast at the same diner every morning. I have lived there my entire life. I inherited my grandmother's house on Maple Street after she passed. I thought I would die in that town, old and comfortable, surrounded by people I had known for decades. I was half right about the dying part. Let me tell you what happened. I'm going to tell you everything, every detail I can remember, because I need you to believe me. I need you to understand that this is real and it could happen to you. It started on a Tuesday. I woke up at 6 in the morning, like I always do. The sun was just starting to come up, painting the sky pink and orange through my bedroom window. I made my coffee, black with 2 sugars, and sat at the kitchen table, listening to the birds outside. Normal morning, peaceful. I had no idea it would be the last normal morning of my life. I had a job scheduled at a farmhouse about 20 minutes outside of town. Electrical work, nothing complicated, just some outlets that needed replacing and a ceiling fan that had stopped working. When I got there, the homeowner was not around. His truck was in the driveway, a red Ford with a dent in the tailgate that I had always recognized. But no one answered the door. I knocked 3 times, waited on the porch for 20 minutes, then figured he had forgotten about the appointment and drove back to town. The roads were empty. I noticed it, but did not think much about it at the time. Cedar Falls is not exactly a bustling metropolis. You can drive down Main Street sometimes and not see another car for 5 minutes. But looking back, I should have noticed that something was wrong. I should have paid attention to the quiet. There were no tractors in the fields, no kids waiting for the school bus, no dogs barking in yards, just empty road and empty sky. I stopped at Linda's diner for breakfast. Linda Marsh has run that place for as long as I can remember. She is in her mid-50s. With grey streaked hair she keeps pulled back in a ponytail and a voice that can cut through any noise in the room. Sharp tongue, kind heart, makes the best eggs in 3 counties. The breakfast crowd was thin that morning. Only 4 or 5 people instead of the usual dozen. I took my regular seat at the counter, and Linda poured my coffee without asking. She mentioned that some of the regulars had not shown up. Old Pete, who had eaten breakfast there every single day for 15 years, was nowhere to be seen. His usual booth sat empty, the red vinyl seat unoccupied, for maybe the first time in a decade. Linda joked that maybe everyone decided to sleep in. I laughed and told her I wished I could sleep in sometimes. She refilled my coffee and moved on to the next customer. I ate my eggs and did not think much of it. Throughout the day, the strangeness piled up like snow in a storm. I saw Deputy Frank Osman driving slowly down Main Street, and he looked troubled. Frank is young, maybe 26, with a baby face that makes him look even younger. He handles the usual small-town problems: drunk drivers on Saturday nights, petty theft at the hardware store, noise complaints from the neighbors of kids who play their music too loud. I had never seen him look worried before. His forehead was creased, and he was gripping the steering wheel hard enough that his knuckles had gone white. Later, I heard people talking at the gas station. The Murphy family on Oak Street had not been seen since the previous afternoon. Mrs. Murphy always walked her poodle at 7 in the morning, regular as clockwork. Not that day. Their car was in the driveway. Their lights had been on all night, burning electricity that nobody was using. But no one answered when people knocked on their door. The curtains were drawn tight. Around 2 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was Tom Wheeler, my neighbor. Tom is 63, retired firefighter, widowed a few years back when cancer took his wife. He lives alone with his golden retriever, Biscuit, in a house that always smells like pine trees because he burns those scented candles his wife used to love. Good man, calm in a crisis. Spent 30 years running into burning buildings while everyone else ran out. I have never seen him scared of anything. He sounded scared on the phone. He asked if I had noticed anything strange. His voice was low, almost a whisper, like he did not want someone to overhear. I told him about the empty roads, the missing regulars at the diner, the Murphy family. He was quiet for a moment, just breathing into the phone. Then he said that Biscuit had been hiding under the bed since the previous night, would not come out, would not eat, would not even take a treat from Tom's hand, and that dog had never refused a treat in his life. Biscuit was shaking like something had terrified him, trembling so hard that Tom could hear the dog's collar jingling from across the room. I told him it was probably nothing. Dogs get spooked sometimes. Maybe there was a storm coming that we could not see yet. Animals sense those things. He did not sound convinced, but he let it go. We hung up, and I went back to work on a wiring job at the elementary school. That evening, I was home watching television when the power flickered. Just a brief stutter, the screen going dark for half a second before coming back. I looked out my window and watched the streetlights go dark, one by one, moving down the block like dominoes falling. First the light on the corner, then the one in front of the Henderson place, then the one near the old oak tree, then mine. My television went black. My refrigerator stopped humming. The house went silent in a way I had never experienced before. I had lived in that house for years, and I had never noticed how many sounds it made until they all stopped at once. I found a flashlight in the kitchen drawer and stepped onto my porch. The neighborhood was completely black. No lights anywhere, not in the houses, not on the street, not even the glow of the city in the distance, which you could usually see on the horizon if you looked hard enough. The darkness was total and complete. No car engines, no voices, no dogs barking, no air conditioners humming or televisions mumbling through open windows. The silence was so complete that it felt physical, like the air itself had thickened around me. I could hear my own heartbeat. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, but nothing else, nothing at all. I called out for Tom. My voice sounded wrong in that silence, too loud, too intrusive, like I had shouted in a church during prayer. My name for him echoed off the houses and faded into nothing. I got no answer. Something in my gut told me to stop making noise. I cannot explain it any better than that. Some ancient instinct, maybe. Something left over from when our ancestors had to hide from predators in the dark. That feeling you get when you know something is watching you even though you cannot see it. Every hair on my body stood up. My skin prickled with goosebumps despite the warm night air. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat in the darkness until morning. I did not sleep that night. I tried. I lay down on my bed and closed my eyes and willed myself to drift off. But every time I started to relax, I heard something outside. Not footsteps exactly, more like something dragging across the pavement. Slow, deliberate, patient, like something heavy being pulled along the ground, inch by inch, in no hurry at all. Around 11 at night, curiosity got the better of fear. I crept to the window and looked through the curtain, moving the fabric aside just a crack. The moon was out, bright and full, casting everything in silver light. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Just my quiet street, my neighbors' dark houses, the oak tree on the corner where kids used to hang a tire swing, the rope still dangling even though no one had used it in years. Then I saw it. Something was standing in front of Tom's house. It was tall, much taller than any person. 7 feet at least, maybe 8. It was completely still, and its head was tilted upward like it was listening to the sky, like it was waiting for some signal from above. I could not make out details. It was too dark, and my hands were shaking too badly to hold the curtain steady, but I could see enough to know that it was not human. The proportions were wrong. The limbs were too long, bending at angles that suggested too many joints, too many places where bone should not bend. It stood there, motionless, for what felt like hours. I watched it. I could not look away. Some part of me needed to understand what I was seeing, even though a larger part wanted to run and hide and pretend I had seen nothing at all. Then, from somewhere down the block, I heard a dog bark. Just once, sharp and loud in the silence, like a gunshot. The thing's head snapped toward the sound so fast that I flinched away from the window. The movement was wrong, too quick, too precise, like a machine zeroing in on a target. When I gathered the courage to look again, it was moving, not walking, not running, flowing, like liquid shadow pouring down the street, covering 50 yards in seconds. I heard the dog yelp once, just once. A single cry of pain or terror or both, then nothing. The silence returned, heavier than before. I backed away from the window. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid it might hear me. I pressed my hand against my chest, like I could somehow muffle the sound. I forced myself to breathe slowly, quietly, counting each breath like my life depended on it. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Out for 4 counts. Maybe it did depend on it. Maybe every sound I made was a death sentence, waiting to be carried out. I remembered that there was a creaky floorboard near my bedroom door. I had been meaning to fix it for months, kept putting it off, kept telling myself I would get to it next weekend. Now I took a wide path around it, testing each step before putting my weight down. The floor groaned softly under my foot once, and I froze for 10 full minutes, not breathing, not moving, just listening. Nothing came. I made it to my closet and pressed myself into the back corner, behind my winter coats, behind boxes of old clothes I had never bothered to donate. I pulled the coats around me like a cocoon and sat there in the darkness, as far from any window as I could get. I stayed there for hours. I did not move. I barely breathed. My legs cramped. My back ached from being pressed against the wall. Sweat soaked through my shirt despite the chill that had settled into my bones. But I did not move. Just before dawn, I heard something on my porch. The wood creaked under weight. Not just once, but multiple times, like something heavy was walking back and forth, testing each board. I heard the railing groan as something leaned against it. I heard the wind chimes my grandmother had hung by the door jangling softly, disturbed by something passing close. Then the sniffing began. Something was right outside my front door. I could hear it breathing, low, rasping breaths that sounded wet and wrong, like lungs that were not shaped for air, like a throat that was made for something other than sound. It was smelling for me, hunting for any trace of the noise I had made hours earlier. It stayed there for several minutes. I bit my hand to keep from making any sound. I bit hard enough to draw blood, tasting copper on my tongue. Tears ran down my face. I have never been so terrified in my life. I have never felt so completely certain that I was about to die. Finally, it moved away. I heard the porch steps creak as it descended. I heard that dragging sound again, moving across the yard, fading into the distance. When the first grey light of dawn appeared in the window, I crawled out of the closet. My legs were cramped so badly I could barely stand. My whole body was shaking. I was covered in sweat, and there were teeth marks in the flesh of my hand. I had survived the first night. I did not know then how many more nights I would have to survive. In the daylight, I risked a look outside. The street looked almost normal. Almost. The emptiness was wrong. No cars moving. No people walking to work. No mail carrier making rounds. No sounds of life at all. Just houses sitting silent under a bright blue sky, looking like a photograph of a town rather than a living place. I noticed dark stains on the sidewalk in front of the house where the dog had barked. They were almost black in the morning sun, still wet looking. I did not look at them for long. I did not want to know what they were. I decided to check on Tom. I crossed to his house as quietly as I could, wincing at every sound my feet made on the grass. Each step seemed impossibly loud. I kept expecting to see one of those things come around a corner, drawn by the whisper of my shoes against the lawn. But nothing came. His front door was unlocked. Inside, the house was dark and still. It smelled like pine trees, like it always did. But there was something else underneath. Something sour. Something wrong. I found Biscuit in the bathroom, hiding behind the toilet, pressed into the corner, like he was trying to disappear into the wall. He was whimpering softly, a tiny sound barely louder than breathing. Poor old dog looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. His golden fur was matted with sweat. Tom was not there. I searched every room. The living room with his recliner and his television. The kitchen with the dishes still in the sink. The bedroom with the bed unmade. The sheets thrown back like he had left in a hurry. I found no sign of him anywhere inside. The back door was open, just a crack, but enough to let the morning breeze drift through. I found his slippers on the porch, sitting neatly side by side like he had just stepped out of them, like he had stood there, looking out at his yard, and then walked away barefoot into the dark. Beyond the porch, a trail of something dark led across the yard and disappeared into the tree line at the edge of his property. The grass was pressed flat, like something heavy had been dragged through it. I understood then. Tom had gone outside during the night. Maybe he heard something and wanted to check on it. Maybe he heard a neighbor calling for help and wanted to see what was wrong. Maybe he just forgot, for one fatal moment, how important silence had become. Whatever the reason, he had made a sound, and now he was gone. I brought Biscuit back to my house. The old dog did not want to leave the bathroom, but I coaxed him out with gentle words and carried him across the yard. He weighed less than I remembered. Fear had taken something out of him. I spent the rest of the day watching from my window. Now that I knew what to look for, I could see them everywhere. They stood motionless between houses, in backyards, at intersections. Tall, grey shapes, barely visible in the daylight. They looked almost like statues, like someone had placed strange sculptures throughout the town as some kind of art installation. But statues do not breathe. Statues do not turn their heads slowly, listening, always listening. I counted at least 7 of them within view of my house. There were probably more hidden in places I could not see. In the afternoon, I saw Deputy Frank's patrol car roll slowly down the street. He was driving with his lights off, moving at walking speed, the engine barely more than a whisper. I waved from my window, trying to get his attention without making noise. He saw me. He held up a piece of paper pressed against his window. Written in large letters, in what looked like marker, was a message that made my blood run cold. Do not make sound. They hear everything. Coming back after dark. Stay inside. I nodded to show I understood. Frank nodded back, a grim expression on his young face. Then he drove on, disappearing around the corner, and I was alone again. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I gathered food that did not require cooking, bread from the pantry, a jar of peanut butter that I could eat with my fingers, canned peaches that I could open slowly, carefully, muffling the sound of the can opener with a towel. I filled every container I could find with water, glasses, bowls, pots, even the bathtub, in case I needed more. I stuffed towels under my doors to muffle any sound from inside. I covered the windows with blankets to hide any movement. I even put socks on Biscuit's paws, tying them gently around his ankles so his nails would not click on the hardwood floors. The old dog looked at me with confusion, but he did not resist. Maybe he understood somehow. Maybe he knew we were trying to survive. I did everything I could think of to make my house as silent as possible. Then I sat in the corner of my living room with Biscuit beside me, and I waited for the second night. Frank came back after dark. He parked his car a block away and walked to my house. He moved with agonizing slowness, placing each foot like he was walking through a minefield. Each step took 5 seconds, sometimes longer. I watched him through a gap in the blankets over my window, and it took him nearly 30 minutes to cross the distance from his car to my door. When he reached the porch, I let him in without a word. We did not speak. We did not even whisper. We communicated through written notes, scribbling messages on a pad of paper I had found in a drawer. He explained that there were survivors gathered at Linda's diner downtown. The walk-in freezer was the safest place they had found because the thick insulation muffled sound. About 12 people were holed up there, shivering in the cold but alive. The phone lines were dead. The radio produced nothing but static. He had tried to drive to the highway that morning, but the road was blocked. He did not say what was blocking it. He just shook his head and wrote that we did not want to know. Help was not coming. Not yet. Maybe not ever. We had to survive on our own. I looked at Biscuit, lying in his bed in the corner. The old dog was watching us with sad eyes. I did not want to leave him, but I knew I could not stay here alone. I made a decision. I left Biscuit in the basement with food and water and a blanket to sleep on. I locked the basement door behind me, hoping he would stay quiet, hoping his old legs would not let him climb the stairs, hoping the soundproofing from my grandmother's canning hobby would keep any noises he made from reaching outside. Then Frank and I stepped out into the second night. The journey through town was the most terrifying experience of my life. We moved one step at a time, freezing whenever we sensed movement nearby. The creatures were everywhere, dozens of them. They stood in the darkness with their heads slowly rotating, listening, always listening. Their movements were barely perceptible, like the hour hand on a clock. You could not see them moving if you watched, but if you looked away and looked back, they had changed position. I got a better look at one as we passed within 20 feet of it. It was worse than I had imagined from my window. The skin was grey, the color of old concrete or weathered stone. The body was thin but tall, impossibly tall, with arms that hung down past where the knees should have been. The joints bent in too many places, like the limbs had been broken and healed wrong multiple times. The face had no eyes, just smooth flesh where eyes should be, like the skin had grown over empty sockets. But the mouth was the worst part. It was too wide, splitting the face almost in half, stretching from one side to the other in a permanent grin. And it was filled with teeth, not regular teeth, jagged shards that looked like broken glass arranged in uneven rows pointing in every direction. It did not move while we watched it. It just stood there, head tilted, listening. At one point, I stepped on a twig. The snap was tiny, barely audible. I would not have noticed it on any normal night. But 3 of the creatures turned toward us instantly, their heads whipping around with that terrible mechanical precision. Frank grabbed my arm. We pressed ourselves against a wall and did not breathe. 5 full minutes passed. The creatures turned their heads slowly, scanning, searching. One of them took a step in our direction, then another. I could feel Frank trembling beside me. I could feel my own heart pounding so hard I was sure they would hear it. My lungs were burning by the time the creatures finally turned away, losing interest in a sound they could not locate again. We continued, We reached the diner and slipped inside. The walk-in freezer was cramped and bitterly cold. Frost had formed on the walls. Our breath came out in visible clouds. Linda was there with 11 others. Some faces I recognized from years of living in Cedar Falls. The cashier from the grocery store, the mechanic who had fixed my car last summer, a teacher from the elementary school. Others were strangers, people passing through town at the wrong time. Everyone was bundled in coats and blankets they had scavenged from the diner. No one spoke. They communicated through gestures and notes, just like Frank and I had. Among the survivors was a man named Greg Nolan. I had known Greg for years, worked on his house a few times, never liked him much. He was loud and abrasive, the kind of man who always had to be the center of attention, who talked over everyone else and never listened. But that night, he was a different person. His hands shook constantly. His eyes were wild and unfocused. His lips moved silently, forming words that never became sounds. Linda handed me a note. The paper was cold and slightly damp from the freezer air. He lost his wife last night. She screamed when she saw one. He watched it happen. I do not think he can hold much longer. I looked at Greg, huddled in the corner, with a blanket wrapped around him like armor. His lips were still moving. His eyes were staring at nothing. Whatever was holding him together was coming apart, piece by piece. I felt something I had never expected to feel for him. Pity. Real, genuine pity. He had watched his wife die and could not even cry out for her, could not say her name, could not do anything but stand there in silence while they took her. I cannot imagine anything worse. Around 2 a.m, Greg broke. He started talking. Just a whisper at first, so quiet I could barely hear him even in the silence of the freezer. He was saying that this was insane, that we could not just sit here and freeze to death, that someone needed to make noise, lots of noise, enough to attract help from outside. Someone had to do something. Someone had to save us. His whisper got louder. People started to notice. Eyes went wide around the freezer. Linda moved toward him, her face pale with fear. She put her hand over his mouth, pressing hard, trying to muffle the sound. He shoved her away and stood up. I tackled him before he could shout. We went down hard on the freezer floor, my arms wrapped around him, trying to pin him down. He fought like a man possessed. His elbow caught my ribs. His knee hit my thigh. We rolled across the cold floor, knocking into boxes and shelving. And then his elbow hit a metal shelf. The clang echoed through the diner like a bell being struck. It was the loudest sound I had heard in 2 days. It seemed to hang in the air, reverberating, impossible to take back. Everyone froze. For a long moment, there was only the hum of the freezer motor, that low, constant drone that we had learned to ignore. Then we heard it. Something was moving in the diner. Multiple somethings. Slow, careful movement. Tables being shifted. Chairs being pushed aside. The sound of things trying to be quiet while they hunted. Then the sniffing began. That horrible, wet, rasping breath. It was coming from right outside the freezer door. I had my hand clamped over Greg's mouth. He was crying, tears streaming down his face, but he had stopped struggling. Maybe he finally understood what he had done. Maybe he was past caring. Everyone in the freezer was pressed against the walls, as far from the door as possible. I could see the terror in their eyes. The teacher was silently praying, her lips moving without sound. The mechanic had his eyes squeezed shut. Linda was clutching a meat tenderizer like it might do some good against what was outside. The creatures scratched at the door. Long, scraping sounds, like fingernails on a chalkboard. They pushed against it. The door was heavy, industrial grade, meant to keep the cold in and everything else out. But it began to buckle inward. Dents appeared in the metal. They were going to get through. It was only a matter of time. Then something happened that I will never forget for as long as I live. An elderly woman in the group stood up. I did not know her name. She was small and frail, with white hair and a kind face, deep wrinkles around her eyes that suggested a life spent smiling. She looked at us with an expression of perfect calm. Before anyone could stop her, she walked to the door and opened it. She stepped out into the diner, into the darkness where the creatures were waiting, and she began to sing. It was a hymn, something old and beautiful, something I half remembered from childhood church services I had not thought about in years. Her voice was clear and strong, filling the silence like light filling darkness. She sang without fear. She sang like she was standing in a choir loft instead of a monster-filled diner in a dying town. I watched through the open doorway as the creatures swarmed toward her. I saw their shapes rush past, grey blurs moving impossibly fast, converging on the source of the sound. There must have been half a dozen of them, maybe more. Her singing lasted about 3 seconds. Then it stopped. But in those 3 seconds, the creatures left the door. They abandoned their prey in the freezer to chase the sound of her voice. Frank slammed the door shut behind her. He threw his weight against it, and someone else helped him, and they held it closed while the sounds from the other side continued. I will not describe those sounds. You do not need to know. I wish I did not know. I wish I could forget. We huddled in the freezer and listened. We listened until there was nothing left to hear, until the creatures finished what they were doing and moved away into the night, until the silence returned. I do not know her name. No one in the freezer did. She was just a stranger who happened to be in town when the nightmare began. She gave her life so that 12 strangers could live a little longer. I will remember her song until the day I die. By morning, we knew we could not stay in the freezer. The cold was becoming dangerous. Some people were shivering so badly they could not hold a pen to write notes. One man's lips had turned blue. More importantly, the creatures now knew where we were. They would remember the sound. They would come back. Frank had a plan. His uncle owned an old hunting cabin about 3 miles outside of town, through the woods. The cabin had a basement shelter that was built during the Cold War, back when people were afraid of bombs falling from the sky. The shelter was designed to be soundproof. If we could reach it, we might be able to hide until help arrived or until the creatures moved on. We debated in written notes. Some people wanted to try for the highway instead. Others wanted to stay and hope for rescue. In the end, 8 of us decided to attempt the cabin. 4 people, including Greg, refused to leave the diner. Greg had not spoken since the night before. He just sat in the corner and stared at nothing. I was with the group, heading for the cabin. We spent the day preparing. We wrapped our shoes in cloth to muffle our footsteps. We practiced moving silently through the diner, testing each footfall before committing our weight. We learned to place our feet on the outside edges first, then roll inward to minimize sound. We studied the route on an old paper map from the diner's lost and found box. We planned to leave at dusk, reasoning that the transition between day and night might give us a window when the creatures were less alert. I thought about Biscuit, alone in my basement. I hoped he was still alive. I hoped he was staying quiet. There was nothing I could do for him now, except survive and come back for him later. We left the diner as the sun was setting. 8 people walking in single file, each one keeping a hand on the shoulder of the person ahead. 8 people trying not to breathe too loudly, not to swallow too hard, not to exist too much in a world that had become a hunting ground. The journey through the woods was worse than the trip through town, much worse. The forest floor was covered with dry leaves and fallen branches. Each step was a potential death sentence. A single crunch could bring them running. A single snapped twig could end everything. We covered maybe 50 feet per hour, testing each footfall, freezing at every suspicious sound. When a squirrel ran up a tree nearby, we all stopped and did not move for 10 minutes. When a branch creaked overhead in the wind, we pressed ourselves against tree trunks and waited. The fear was exhausting. Every muscle in my body was clenched tight. Every nerve was screaming for me to run. The creatures were in the woods too. I saw them between the trees, standing motionless, listening. There were more of them than in town. Many more. The woods were full of them. Dozens, maybe hundreds. They stood in clearings. They stood against tree trunks. They stood in places where the moonlight did not reach, their grey bodies blending into the shadows until you almost did not see them. At one point, we passed within 10 feet of one. I could smell it, a scent like rotting meat and copper, thick enough to taste. The smell of old blood and something else, something I could not identify, something that made my stomach turn. I could hear its breathing, that wet rasp that haunted my nightmares. It did not move. It did not know we were there. We were maybe halfway to the cabin when disaster struck. A young man near the back of the group tripped on a root. He was tired. We all were. His foot caught on something in the darkness, and he went down. He fell forward and crashed into the person in front of him. The sound was loud in the silence, bodies hitting leaves, a startled grunt escaping before it could be stopped. The creatures reacted instantly. I heard them coming from every direction, branches snapping under their weight. That horrible breathing getting closer. The sound of many things moving fast through the forest, converging on our location. Frank grabbed my arm and pulled me into a run. The plan fell apart. The careful silence, the measured steps, all of it gone. People scattered in every direction. I heard screaming behind me. I heard sounds that I will not describe because I do not want you to have those images in your head. I did not look back. I just ran. I ran blindly through the darkness. Branches tore at my face. I felt blood running down my cheek from a cut I did not remember getting. I tripped and fell and got back up and kept running. The sounds of pursuit were all around me. Heavy footsteps, that rasping breath, the crack of branches breaking under something heavy. I do not know how long I ran. Minutes that felt like hours. My lungs were burning. My legs were screaming for me to stop. But I kept going. I do not know how I found the cabin. Luck, instinct, maybe something else. I burst through the door and slammed it shut behind me. The creatures hit the walls outside almost immediately, scratching, pounding, trying to get in. I could hear them circling the cabin, testing every window, every board. I found the basement hatch in the floor and pulled it open. I dropped through it and pulled the heavy door closed above my head. The door was thick, reinforced, designed to keep out radiation from bombs that never fell. Now it was keeping out something worse. The basement was pitch black and absolutely silent. The soundproofing worked. I could not hear anything from above. Not the scratching, not the pounding, nothing. Just perfect, complete silence. For the first time in days, I was surrounded by true quiet. I crawled into a corner and pressed my back against the wall. I was shaking so badly that my teeth chattered. I clamped my jaw shut and forced myself to be still. Even here, even in this soundproof room, I was afraid to make noise. I do not know how long I stayed in that basement. Hours, maybe a full day. I drifted in and out of consciousness, too terrified to truly sleep, too exhausted to stay fully awake. Time lost all meaning in the darkness. There was no light. There was no sound. There was just me, alone, waiting for something to happen. When I finally worked up the courage to open the hatch, sunlight poured down through the gap. It was daytime. The cabin was empty. The door hung open, torn half off its hinges. There were dark stains on the floor and on the porch that I did not look at closely. I did not want to know whose they were. I stepped outside. The woods were silent. Nothing moved. The creatures were gone from this area, at least for now. Maybe they had moved on. Maybe they were sleeping. Maybe they were hunting somewhere else. I walked back to Cedar Falls. It took most of the day. My legs ached. My throat was raw. I had not had water in over 24 hours. I moved slowly, carefully, placing each step like I had learned to do, even though every part of me wanted to run. The town was empty. Cars sat abandoned in the streets. Doors hung open on houses. The traffic light on Main Street was still working, blinking yellow, yellow, yellow over an intersection that no one would ever cross again. There were stains everywhere, but no bodies. Whatever these things did to the people they caught, they did not leave remains behind. The creatures were still there. I saw them in the shadows between buildings, standing motionless in the daylight. They seemed dormant, sluggish, less active than at night. But they were not gone. They were waiting. I moved as quietly as I could. I breathed through my mouth to minimize the sound. I placed each foot on soft ground whenever possible. It took me 2 hours to cover 5 blocks. I reached my house on Maple Street. The door was still locked, just as I had left it. I went down to the basement and found Biscuit alive. Weak, but alive. The old dog wagged his tail when he saw me. A tired, slow wag, but real. I almost started crying. Something in this town was still alive. Something that depended on me had survived. I got Biscuit into my car and put him in the passenger seat. He laid his head on my lap while I started the engine. I winced at the noise. The creatures did not react. Maybe they had learned to ignore car engines. Maybe they were too full from their hunting to care. Maybe they were saving their energy for the next night. I did not care. I drove out of Cedar Falls and did not stop until I reached the city. That was 3 days ago. I have tried to tell people what happened. No one believes me. They look at me like I'm crazy. They suggest I see a therapist. They change the subject. Cedar Falls has been sealed off. The official story is a chemical spill, something toxic that made evacuation necessary. I have seen the news reports. The town is empty. Residents are listed as missing. Authorities are investigating. They will not find anything. The creatures will not let them find anything. I have seen reports about other small towns going dark in the past few days. Communications cut off. No one able to reach them. The pattern is spreading. It is moving outward from Cedar Falls. Or maybe it started in multiple places at once. I do not know. What I know is this. They hunt by sound. Any sound. A whisper. A footstep. A heartbeat if you are scared enough. They cannot see, but they do not need to. Their hearing is impossibly sharp. They can track a single noise from hundreds of feet away. They are tall and grey, with too many joints and mouths full of broken glass. They do not eat during the day, but they do not leave either. They wait. They listen. When night falls, they hunt. There is no way to fight them. There is no way to reason with them. They are not intelligent in any way we understand. They are just hunters, following instinct, drawn to sound like sharks to blood. The only way to survive is silence. Complete, perfect, absolute silence. If you are reading this and you live in a small town, pay attention to the news. Pay attention to reports of missing people, of power outages, of communications going dark. If it happens near you, get out immediately. Do not wait to see what is happening. Do not investigate. Do not try to help. Just get in your car and drive as far away as you can. If you cannot escape, if they have already surrounded your town, then find somewhere safe, somewhere soundproof, a basement, a walk-in freezer, anywhere you can hide without making noise. Stock it with food and water. Seal the doors and wait. Wait for daylight, then run. Do not scream. Do not cry. Do not whisper prayers or comfort to yourself. Any sound you make will bring them to you. I am posting this because people need to know. The news will not tell you what is really happening. The government will not admit what they are facing. But the truth is spreading, one town at a time. And if we do not warn people, if we do not tell them how to survive, then everyone will die the way my neighbors died, the way Tom died, the way that brave old woman in the diner died. I still hear her song sometimes when I close my eyes. It was beautiful. It was the last beautiful thing I heard before the world went quiet. I have Biscuit with me. We are staying in a motel far from Cedar Falls. I do not know what to do next. I do not know if there is anything I can do. Maybe this warning is all I have left to offer. Please believe me. Please be careful. Please, if the silence comes to your town, do not make a sound. They can hear you. They are always listening. And once they hear you, There is nothing in this world that can save you from what comes next.